Welcome everyone, Questini here with a discussion about Total War Warhammer 3 Immortal Empires, and specifically to talk about the Empire and how it is completely and utterly broken. To the point that I'm not quite entirely certain that Thrones of Decay, even if Creative Assembly was willing to put in a significant amount of effort and do a major racial rework, even if they were willing to do that, I'm not quite sure they would be able to fix all the problems. So they can certainly improve the situation from where it is at the moment. But even in a modded campaign like this one that I have here as Balthazar Guild at turn 40, the Empire is in a dismal state in terms of their campaign mechanics, the terrain they have to deal with, their unit roster, their hero roster. There's an enormous number of issues, which make the Empire one of the worst races in the game by far. Alongside, like, the only races that I would consider worse, genuinely worse in terms of their design, are things like Nurgle and Ogres. And believe it or not, Ogres can become pretty decent with mods. The Empire is so broken that even with mods, it still is not a great experience. At least as Balthazar Gelt or Karl Franz. Marcus Wolfhard and Volkmar, bit of a different situation. There are 4 Imperial Legendary Lords. 2 of them share the same mechanic, the Imperial Authority for Gelt and Karl Franz. Marcus Wolfhard has Aggression, or rather Hostility, and Volkmar has the Books of Nagash, which is something that they added specifically for Immortal Empires. Now, each of these systems has significant issues. For Marcus Wolfhard, the constant hostility forces him to deal with the Doom stack and also hurts his campaign situation by quite a bit, because you have to deal with that Doom stack, but you're also going to have a significant problem with public order in your campaign. It is a very outdated campaign system. It was outdated in Mortal Empires for Warhammer 2. It didn't work that well, and I think Marcus Wolfhard was the most unpopular Imperial campaign by far. What about Volkmar and the Books of Nagash? Well, Volkmar ends up working better than all the other campaigns. He does have a pretty rough start in Immortal Empires, having to fight in the Thunderdome of Khemri, as it were. But the only downside in his campaign from a campaign system situation is that he has to get the Books of Nagash, which are pretty far apart from one another, and may require you to go to war with factions that you would rather not go to war with. And that's, by the way, a similar situation over here in the Old World mod, because, like, you have to go all the way in Caracade Peaks to take out Skarsnik's capital. Enjoy dealing with that, or rather his the provincial capital in the same province where he does actually have his capital in the Silver Tarn. So imagine that, dealing with that situation. That's just one thing that you have to deal with when you are playing as Volkmar, the Books of Nagash. But it's honestly the only major downside his campaign has from that perspective, from a campaign system's perspective. He does, however, suffer from all the other issues that the Empire has. As for Balthazar Gelt and Karl Franz, they have to deal with the Imperial Authority system. Now, this is a modded campaign that gives you more benefits as you get higher Imperial Authority. But the way the system works is, if you have +1 Imperial Authority, you get a couple of benefits. If you have lower, you get downsides, and you can eventually get the Civil War, where you end up having to fight all the elector counts. Now, honestly, if it wasn't for other downsides that affect your economy, I would possibly go for that Civil War in every Imperial campaign. But the downsides are of such a nature that you pretty much don't want that to happen. Here's the problem with Imperial Authority. It's very easy to lose it, because you lose Imperial Authority every time an elector count gets wiped out, or rather when their capital gets wiped out. So if Talabayam falls, I lose Imperial Authority. And in this particular campaign, I am in a minus because, well, Reichland has collapsed to Kemmler, Hochland has collapsed, the Ostland has collapsed, Ostermark has collapsed, Stirland has lost its capital in Wertbad, and so on and so forth. So lots of significant issues with that system, especially because these electric counts that we're thinking about, Hochland, Ostermark, and others, are just basically designed right now in Immortal Empires to be starry enemies for Legendary Lords. And Legendary Lord factions are stronger than non-Legendary Lord factions. So more often than not, these factions will end up being wiped out by these Legendary Lords. Yes, you can use some mods that does improve the situation, but again, typically it will happen. So you're put in a position, and this is where things get broken. You're put in a position where you need to be very, very aggressive in a campaign, as any of the Imperial Legion Lords, but especially as Gelt and Karl Franz, where you need to be aggressive to deal with your enemies. The problem is, you don't really have the tools to succeed with that. See, aggression, early game aggression, is generally the way to go in a campaign. Absolutely. As any race. Doesn't matter how they're designed. Taking territory, fighting armies, getting experience, getting money is always beneficial. But the Empire takes it to a next level. Because they have to be aggressive with a lot of enemies to keep Imperial authority in check, to keep the Empire alive. But at the same time, they don't really benefit that much from it. Or rather, the benefits come 40 turns down the line, if they ever come, really. And the problem with it, you're not really going to gain... Like, you're going to gain money, you're going to gain experience, but you're not going to gain territory, which is important because more territory, more money, more unit recruitment, more hero capacity. Like, actually, over here in this campaign, as Gelt, I actually have a decent amount of territory, and I have wiped out none. Deliberately wiped them out, because, well, one of the things I do want to get my hands on is to get access to the Null Cannon Foundry, to be able to actually recruit artillery. Because artillery is tier 4. But I'll get into the unit recruitment situation in just a second. So you have that situation. You have two campaigns, the two principal ones, really, Karl Franz and Gelt, that force you to push for early aggression, but you don't really have the tools to succeed in that, because you're not going to get as much, say, income from sacking and looting settlements. You may not even keep those settlements, because you may want to give them back to the elector counts in order to get fealty or imperial authority. And here's the thing about fealty and imperial authority. You can confederate another faction at 10 fealty if the event actually works. How buggy things are, that's a bit of a different discussion. But once you get to 10 fealty, you can confederate another imperial faction. But there's a lot of issues with that. One, you may not necessarily gain all that much from these imperial factions, because if they're weak factions constantly under pressure, how much territory and armies they're going to have? Most of the time, they're going to have very, very little. Sure, you can leave them be, but you actually do want to take these elector counts, because you do want to gain... you do want to get the items, you do want to get the state troopers, like Emperor's Wrath. I really should put an elector count, like over here. Let's go with Gotrek. So this is something that you want to do for the state troopers, for the upkeep benefit, as well as other benefits in a campaign. This is something that's pretty damn important to do during the course of a campaign. So you do want to take those elector counts. And yet it just feels like you're running around like a hellish chicken trying to deal with this. Even if the Empire was a great faction with a great unit roster, great economy, it would still be a miserable campaign system to deal with. The best campaign really to play, even though it's pretty harsh in a lot of ways and not necessarily all that fun either, is Volkmar's campaign, because you don't deal with this nonsense. The only nonsense you have to deal with in that particular campaign is the nonsense of the Books of Nagash, which the Tomb Kings have to deal with. And it's not a great system either, but certainly nowhere near as bad as the hostility situation that Marcus Wolfhard has to deal with, or Imperial Authority. But that's just the first issue of the Empire. The other issue of the Empire. Let's talk about recruitment. So, you have 3 Lord types. Archlectors, Generals, and Huntsman General. Huntsman Generals are decent enough at buffing your army, but pretty useless to actually use in a fight, because they're ranged lords, and ranged lords in Warhammer 3, unlike Warhammer 2, ranged lords are not that effective. It comes down to all the range issues that this game does have. Archlectors are decent enough, absolutely. They have some pretty powerful spells, powerful abilities. Well, they have spells that don't require winds of magic, and they can get access to damage resistance, melee attack, and an AoE spell that, again, doesn't require Winds of Magic, so pretty useful stuff. Generals in the Empire are pretty pathetic and not worth it at all. Though it should be pointed out, both Arch-Electors and Huntsman Generals, the only ones that are actually worth it are the Arch-Electors, but you can use Huntsman General. I would not use Generals of the Empire, without mods at least. Arch-Electors and Huntsman General are both DLC lords. So the Empire only gets generals if you're playing by default, which is a problem. But the lord selection is not that great. What about the army selection? This is where things get really bad. Like, having bad lord choices for your armies is one thing. Having horrible armies is another thing. Like, you might think, oh, you can recruit so many units over here, right? It's turn 40, by the way, and I still haven't gotten to tier 4. I could if I, if I was not building up this town to tier 3. I've had this cattle ranch for a very long time in this campaign, and I can't. And while I certainly could afford the growth building, in fact, I'm going to go for that with the tap room, though I'm not going to continue this campaign. The situation is so horrible playing the Empire that I have no interest. I've tried in the old world with Karl Franz, I've tried with Volkmar, I've tried with Gelt now. It is not workable. It's like the map helps, but it doesn't fix the fundamental issues that the Empire has. And this is with mods to make the Empire better. So what's the problem? Well, in terms of basic unit recruitment, at tier 1, you only get archers and spearmen. Here's the thing about that. Spearmen are a worthless unit, have weak stats, don't do very well in combat. They're a throwaway unit. They're a disposable unit. Though they have a bit too high upkeep for my taste. Archers, they're decent enough range units, though they would lose to things like Goblin Archers or Kossars from Kislev and many other early game range units in the game. They're pretty pathetic. Crossbowmen are really the early game alternative for the Empire, though they are a tier 2 unit. But from tier 1, you get Archers. This is the indispensable unit for the Empire. The problem here is, this is a DLC unit. So you got the crap race with DLCs, and if you don't have DLCs, you might as well not even touch this damn race, because without archers, without both DLCs, you're gonna be screwed. Like, without Volkmar's DLC, you're not gonna be able to get Dark Selector, so you won't have good lords to lead your armies. Without Marcus's Wolfart DLC, you won't be able to recruit archers and huntsmen, which will screw you over as well in a very significant fashion. So that is a problem. The other things that you can recruit from a tier 1 barracks, beyond those guys, are Free Company Militias and Swordsmen, both of which are pretty pathetic units in their own right. Again, not great units, not great melee stats, not great survivability at all, not great armor, not good dodge resolve, not good combat potential. Like, Swordsmen are one of the worst units in the freaking game. Like, peasants from Bretonnia can stand up to these guys. That's how pathetic they are. We're talking of a unit that's only marginally better than the peasants of Bretonnia and the regular goblins. Not the goblin archers, the goblin spearmen that the greenskins can recruit at tier 1. Never mind, goblin archers are a significantly better unit than your archers. At tier 2, you get access to crossbowmen, halberdiers, and spearmen with shields, as well as cavalry units. You're probably not going to be able to get those cavalry units. One, they cost a lot, they're not useful in sieges at all, and while they obviously can help you out in field battles, you really need to focus your campaign around sieges because you will have a lot of sieges to deal with. Though you can certainly get cavalry, and certainly the cavalry roster of the Empire is the only shining spot for the Empire. But the thing is, cavalry is very situational in a campaign. You can't make a campaign work with just cavalry, unless you're Bretonnia, and the reason it works for Bretonnia is because they have cavalry like questing knights that can work well within the confines of narrow streets, and can work well in a stand-up fight. The Empire is skirmisher and charge cavalry. That's the difference. So if you get like Imperial Knights, Pistoliers, Outriders, Demigryph Knights, none of these units are focused on prolonged melee engagement. They're all focused on cycle charging or skirmishing. Now, a couple of these guys are useful in an army, but the difference with Bretonnia is that, yeah, a full cav army of questing knights can end up working. And then obviously Grail Knights and all that can end up working quite well. Grail Guardians specifically, those things can work well. The Empire Cav roster, great on field battles, not great in sieges. That's the difference between the Empire and Bretonnia in that respect. Though on field battles, the Empire can certainly match Bretonnia in quite a few ways. Though Bretonnia also has the advantage of flying cavalry, which again is great for sieges and is also great for field battles. And great for cycle charging, though there are some certain issues with that. Now, here's the problem with Tier 2. You need halberdiers and spearmen with shields. They're not great units either. They still don't have the stats required to do a great job in a fight. Although, to be fair, halberdiers will hold up pretty decently well in stand-up melee fight, though they'll take a significant amount of damage from ranged and will practically be pulverized in auto-resolve. They're one of the worst units you can recruit in terms of auto-resolve, actually, as the Empire. And while you may want to fight a lot of battles when you're playing campaign on Legendary very hard, it isn't great to recruit units that just take that significant level of damage. Spearmen shields are decent enough flank protectors, but they're not great. The only Spearmen shields that I would say are really worth recruiting are the state troopers that Gelt can recruit from the very start, the Eldred's Guards, because these guys actually have a high level of armor, unlike the regular Spearmen with Shields. Maybe that regular Spearmen with Shields should have that, at least for the campaign. I'm not interested in the discussion about multiplayer balance. I couldn't care less. I understand that some of these balance decisions are made for the sake of multiplayer, but here's the problem. You have a bunch of crap units, but the issue isn't that they're just bad, they're also expensive to maintain. Like, that's the thing, like, a Spearman Shield is 102, all that. Now, granted, this is with supply lines, all that, but still, these units might be very cheap to recruit, but they're not so cheap to maintain. This is the problem, because while the economy of the Empire is decent, isn't the top tier economy. It's not the Dark Elf economy, for instance, or a High Elf economy. Or hell, even a Dwarf economy. Yes, the Dwarfs have a better economy than the Empire. So the number of units you can maintain are limited. The only units that are really worth recruiting are crossbowmen at tier 2. And by the way, if you want to recruit halberdiers or Empire Knights, or any of that, you do require to get a blacksmith. The Empire, I think, is the only race that's left in the game that requires this. Like, of all the things that Creative Assembly has done over the years, the fact that they have never changed this, like, I understand if you remove that requirement, it makes the armory and blacksmith useless, but it's just like, remove the benefit, remove the entire building. Like, it's to the point with the Empire, the buildings they have, some of them are just flat out fucking useless, and you only get them because of requirements for other things. This is where it gets really annoying with the Empire when we're thinking about it. Because you need to get a lot of territory, a lot of buildings to be able to recruit this stuff. This is the reason why any Empire player worth their salt very rarely recruits cavalry in their campaigns, with the exception of state troopers, because you just don't have the building slots. Like, there are better things you can do, like either improving your economy or getting heroes or infantry units that are actually worth it. The only units that are worth recruiting as the Empire from the infantry chain, beyond crossbowmen, which are tier 2, are the great swords and the huntsmen. Now, great swords, the problem with them is they require an armory. Huntsmen require a DLC. So enjoy that situation. Now, you could technically put an armory in the same tier 3 settlement that you built for the barracks. Makes sense. Problem is you're going to sacrifice a building slot for the sake of that. And it's typically better to spread these kind of unit recruitments around for a variety of reasons. In fact, it's not even great to have a barracks in a provincial capital. It's generally better to have it in a minor settlement because you want to usually use the provincial capital for other things. So for instance, over here, I would eventually move the barracks from the capital to Steingard, right here, and get like an artillery shop in the capital once I get to tier 4. Now, Great swords require a lot. They also are decently expensive to maintain. And they're not that great of a unit. Like, they're on par with armor Khazars and on par... Well, armor Khazars with great weapons and on par with Warriors of Chaos with great weapons. Both of those can be acquired significantly earlier in a campaign. Basically, the Empire spends, I don't know, 24 turns, let's say, at minimum, to recruit a unit that other races can recruit in, I don't know, 10 turns. Or much faster. You can get armor Khazars as Kislev within actually like 2 turns. Like if you have a tier 2 starting settlement and you have a tier 1 barracks, you can get that barracks to tier 2 and start recruiting armor Khazars from the very beginning. The limiting factor for Kislev is their economy, but they can get access to a unit. It's pathetic for the Empire to be outmatched by Kislev in this respect. Because Kislev is supposed to be a backwater, a nation that struggles to just stay alive in the lore, whereas the Empire is like, the Empire should be the strongest civilization on the map. And by the way, these issues that I'm talking about here, they don't just affect you as the player. The Empire having limitations in terms of how many units they can recruit, bad lore choices, bad unit choices also affects the AI. Like if you're playing any campaign as any other race, the Empire is the easiest part of the campaign map to conquer, by far. They will not put any kind of real fight. The only serious struggle you might encounter early on is they might have, I know, a bunch of pistoliers or outriders to throw against you, but even then, that's not too big of a challenge to deal with. Compared to the hordes of greenskins, the heavily armored dwarves, and so on and so forth. Like, even weak races will put up a better fight than the Empire does. And these kind of limitations that the Empire has really screw them over. So the Empire is up a free territory that's up for grabs for anyone that starts in it. And we're not finished. Artillery. A very crucial element in every campaign, in particular in Immortal Empires, because of settlement density forcing you to fight a lot of sieges. The Empire has a good artillery roster that is inaccessible as fuck. Because the problem is, at tier 3, you only get mortars. Now, mortars can be decent, but they do no actual damage against walls. They'll struggle to do damage against walls, so you'll end up fighting a lot of sieges where you're gonna take damage from towers, and you're just gonna park all your archers outside those walls, try and kill the units on the walls. It works, but it's not a great situation to siege. It's a problem Kislev has as well, that they do require tier 4, except Kislev has the melee firepower and magic to deal with sieges in other ways rather than just blowing up the walls with artillery. The Empire doesn't have that ability. Like, even a full greatsword army. Like, we can talk about how the fact that Sargard completely outclass greatswords in every single way. They can have more survivability or they can have more damage. But when we're talking about artillery, outside of Nuln, which has a very specific settlement for this, you need tier 4 to be able to recruit cannons and hellstorms. Now, cannons and hellstorms are really powerful units, but it's gonna take you a significant amount of time to get to it. Oh, and by the way, all of the things that I'm talking about, tier 3 armory costs 3,000, a tier 2 2,000. You're flushing 5,000 coins down the toilet just to be able to unlock some unit recruitment, on top of having to get 2 different tier 3 settlements for this. In the most ideal sense, though, you could make do with just one if it's a provincial capital, or even a minor settlement if you want to risk putting everything in one particular settlement, minor settlement like that. It's not a great idea. It's not efficient to do it in a provincial capital, so you might gain the early benefit, but you are going to hurt yourself in the long term. It is a dilemma some other races have to some extent, but none have it as bad as the Empire. But you do have a good artillery roster, but you need to get tier 4. That is one of the worst situations to encounter in a campaign. Like, consider this. Bretonia. Fucking Bretonia of all the races. The greenskins can get tier 2 artillery. You cannot get anything anything at all until you're tier 3. So these building chains, the building requirements need to be absolutely changed completely. On top of that, because it gets worse, it would be bad enough to have these kind of requirements in themselves, but no, it's actually worse than that, because then you encounter another issue, another limitation, so to speak. Heroes. One of the ways you can make an Imperial campaign work is to recruit a significant amount of warrior priests. All you need to do is get tier 3 settlements, and then you can increase your capacity by 1. But the problem with this, the building you're recruiting warrior priests from is only useful for recruiting warrior priests. Flagellants are not worth it at all, so you're basically pouring a significant amount of money, specifically 3,000, just to increase your hero capacity by 1. Now, High Elves and other races may have this similar issue, but as always, in this respect, it's worse for the Empire than it is for other races, because captains are the only ones that are recruited from building that you use for other purposes, and captains are worthless as heroes. I mean, they're decent enough as a melee stick, but they have no special skill line, they're not all that exciting. But hey, you'll get a bunch of captains if you get a bunch of barracks, decent enough. Warrior priests, you need to spend a significant amount of money on a building just for the sake of them. Now you might say, well, don't the High Elves have the same situation with nobles, and don't they even need tier 4 in order to increase their noble capacity? Yes, that is true for the High Elves. Except the High Elves have other options than just relying on warrior priests in their campaigns. That's another thing worth pointing out. Like with the High Elves, you can get handmaidens if you want to get replenishment. So, like, the main reason you get warrior priests beyond their melee capability is for the sake of replenishment. Though it's really the melee capability, whereas, you look at a race like High Elves, who, by the way, are not too great when it comes to hero recruitment capacity. You can recruit multiple heroes in different ways. And hell, with those campaigns, you can increase the hero capacity. Like if you're playing Emmerich, you can get a significant number of noble capacity through just his special skill line. You don't really have that kind of benefit as the Empire, and you do want warrior priests. You might get captains if you're playing Karl Franz. Yay, captains, so wonderful as heroes. Not really. But one of the ways to make a campaign work as the Empire is get a bunch of warrior priests, so you're just getting a building for the sake of that. Now, there's never any reason to get this building higher than tier 3. Sure, the hero crew rank would be useful, but you would basically need a tier 5 settlement in order to make that worth it. Plus 2 is not necessarily worth it all that much. With mages, you're just getting Wizard Conclave for the sake of them. Luminarchs are not worth recruiting in a campaign, and that's also tier 5. Worth pointing out, mages can only increase their capacity in provincial capitals. Though that's a similar situation for Dark Elves, for instance. Though if we want to compare like the economic potential of the Dark Elves and instant construction and growth to the Empire, yeah, there's no contest. Dark Elves win hands down. Also, we could talk about like the pure magical potential of the Dark Elves, High Elves versus the Empire, because yeah, the Elves have far, far better mages than what the Empire does have through their Lords of Magic. Then you get the Tavern to increase, to be able to recruit Witch Hunters, though annoyingly enough, it doesn't increase Witch Hunter capacity until tier 4. So lots of problems in terms of recruiting heroes in a campaign. So you end up with a race that has horrible armies, horrible lords, and severe limitations on hero recruitment, paired with terrible campaign mechanics for all their legendary lords minus Volkmar, who isn't necessarily swimming in glory. And the annoying thing is, you have to put a lot of effort to just get to the same level that other races start with. Like, I'll give you a comparison. The dwarves are a really bad race in a lot of ways to play by default. But here's the thing, the dwarves, yes, the fucking dwarves, who aren't a great race, can get access to pretty powerful units very quickly and without much hassle. And they always have been able to. While certainly some units like, Dwarf warriors with great weapons, or blasting charges, or quarrelers with great weapons were locked behind this kind of building combination. It was the variance. You could still recruit baseline dwarf warriors, baseline quarrelers, baseline miners with just basic buildings. With the current situation as it is, and that was before Creative Assembly changed it for dwarves and removed those kind of requirements. So the dwarves, for all their issues, limited economy, weak growth, really terrible post-battle loot, can actually make powerful armies. And they can get a decent amount of hero capacity as well. Though, yes, they do require some tier 4 buildings for that. But you may not be flushing so much money down the toilet for a building that does absolutely zilch except increase your hero capacity. Which is not the case for dwarves, because the runesmith building increases your local recruitment capacity. The engineering building, yeah, you might use it for other purposes. And while the Halls of Oaths is pretty much exclusively used to increase feign capacity, that's rather the exception. And point is, dwarves will not need so many buildings combined to make it worth it. Whereas the Empire requires a lot of buildings for heroes, requires a lot of buildings for units, and has severe limitations. Also, this makes them incredibly vulnerable. And their campaigns are designed in such a way that regardless of which campaign you're playing, except Volkmar, you will end up, you are kind of pushed into a position of handling limited territory. Marcus Wolfhard can take as much territory as he wants, but then he ends up dealing with that control issue. Also, he's in fucking Lustria, which is not a great situation for him to deal with because things are fairly slow to progress through in Lustria. And these are some of the fundamental problems of the Empire and why it makes it terrible. Bad campaign design, bad racial mechanics across the board, and to top it all off, the research tree is not necessarily all that great. It's a mess of a system. There's some useful stuff like ammunition, volley fire, all that kind of stuff. Yes, there is obviously useful research, clergy of Sigmar, memorialism, those kind of things, or Imperial University. Absolutely, there are useful things in this research tree, but a lot of things do take a long time to get done, and a lot of things are not necessarily all that much worth it either. So the research tree could also use an overhaul. And yeah, structures can cost an arm and a leg to get to a higher level. You want to compare the 2,000 that the Empire has to spend to get to tier 2 settlement capital compared to, say, the Greenskins or other races? We can make that comparison. And the final nail in the coffin, unlike Cafe, unlike Wolf-One, unlike many other areas, the Empire is crowded with legendary lords. Just to give you some examples, in the Immortal Empires, you've got Festus, you've got Draika, you've got Vlad, you've got Kemler very close enough. You've got Kazrak, you've got Azag, and you've got Scrag that can also be an annoyance and generally is in an Imperial campaign. That's a lot of legendary lords, and because of the nature of Imperial campaigns as Gelt and Karl Franz, you do focus on the entire Empire. The systems need to be overhauled, the buildings need to be overhauled, the unit recruitment needs to be overhauled. Great Sword should be a tier 2 unit. Like Armored Cossars, which is a unit they can trade blows with. Like, to be fair, Great Swords would probably defeat Armored Cossars in a straight up fight, until you account for all the other benefits that Kislev has that would make a Kislevite army beat the shit out of an Imperial army. In fact, when I'm playing Kislev campaign, this is exactly what I do. I take my armies from Kislev and I don't fight fucking chaos. I go conquer the Empire because it's easy territory that gives me a lot of money and is safe because I eliminate the threats that are in the way. Whereas the Empire, you're trying to just unify the territory dealing with these threats and not having the resources or terrain, whereas Kislev just burns the Empire to the ground, takes over the territory, gets rich in the process. That is the sad state of affairs of the Empire. And lore-wise, it should be the other way around. The Empire should be the one aiding Kislev, not Kislev ransacking the Empire. That's all I had to say. Hopefully, things will change with Thrones of Decay. If there's any overhaul mod, outside of SFO that you guys would recommend, I'd be very interested in hearing that. But right now, even with a model like the Old World, which does a lot to help with things because of the better map it has, it's still a miserable experience. Oh, and let's not forget the Changeling. The reason Gelt is struggling to move over here in this territory is because the freaking Changeling has probably put buildings here to slow down campaign movement for my lord. Yay, that's fun, isn't it? Oh joy.